Hello, my name is Amy Cunningham, and my group and I will be talking about the WorldCom Scandal of 2002. Some of the topics we'll be getting into is the WorldCom's background, warning signs, stakeholders, various red flags among the company, failure of external audit, how the fraud was detected, and the consequences and aftermath of this fraud. WorldCom was founded in 1983 after a series of acquisitions, and the name was not officially WorldCom until 1995. It was the second largest company in the U.S. in terms of the long-distance telecommunications industry. And the CEO was Bernard Ebbers. He was from Canada, and he was a milkman and the former high school basketball coach, and he worked his way up the corporate ladder once he moved to the United States. WorldCom was beginning to decline financially after refusing to integrate new mobile phone technology into its strategy in the late 1990s, and it was found that they actually overstated their assets by $11 billion in 2002. So some of the warning signs for WorldCom was that the number of acquisitions it took part in amounted up to $41 billion in debt, and the controller David Myers, CFO Sullivan, and CEO Evers colluded to intentionally mislead external auditors and misrepresent the financial statements. And CEO Evers placed a heavy importance on performance and numbers without implementing systems to ensure that business practices were actually ethical. And the board of directors also made massive loans with low interest rates to executives. So some of the stakeholders that were adversely affected were the investors and creditors, telecommunications industry, and the auditors and accounting industry. The investors and creditors lost a large amount of money, and it was one of the biggest bankruptcies of all time. The telecommunications industry, a lot of the consumers lost trust in this industry due to the fraud, as well as the accounting industry, along with other financial frauds such as Enron and Tyco.
Hello, my name is Sean Woody, and there have been many red flags with the WorldCom company to have revealed the fraud to have happened. Some include the unethical corporate culture, where management would push this idea that they knew what was best on their employees, which created a very uncomfortable environment for employees to work in, and also the incompetence of the audit groups because their practices weren't really sufficient enough to have investigated their records or talk about the operations in which they could have found out fraud to have been happening, and they were very reliant on management to make decisions. Management also withheld key information from their key employees and auditors. They also basically restricted communication between their personnel, which meant that nobody was really discussing things with each other, so things were being very ineffective and inefficient. And they also lacked support documentation for their accounts in case there were any real discrepancies. The support documentation they had wasn't very sufficient for revealing exactly what they were doing, and it also just lacked any support by the accounting principals. The external auditors, which were Arthur Anderson, also failed at their job. They failed on a professional level, and they failed with communicating with anybody within the company, which meant that they drew conclusions that were very vague and unhelpful and inaccurate. But in the end, the whistleblower, Cynthia Cooper of the Internal Audit Department, found out about the fraud, and despite being asked to not continue her investigation, she did it anyway, and she found many things, including overstated assets and improper adjustments to the expenses and the accruals.
Hello everyone, my name is Sam Dillon. So how could this have been prevented? I think in several different ways. Number one, stronger internal controls. This may have prevented Scott Sullivan, the company's CFO, to order changes in accounts. Number two, lack of separation of duties. This case is a little more complicated because there was collusion involved, but I do believe that there was truly separation of duties, this could have been prevented. Number three, better education. Bernie Ebbers did actually not start in business. His background, his degree was in physical education. He did not understand the term internal controls. And when brought up by Cynthia Cooper, the term internal controls, he simply told her to stop using it because he did not understand it. Bernie Ebbers was actually sentenced to 25 years in prison. Scott Sullivan, the CFO, was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and the list goes on, as you can see. Something I did want to talk about was Kenneth Avery and Melvin Dick. They were the primary auditors for WorldCom and worked for Arthur Anderson. Kenneth was barred for 3 years, and Melvin was barred for 4 years from practicing accounting. They were penalized because they did not exercise due care and professional skepticism, which professional skepticism is something that we emphasize in our class. It simply means don't just take their word for it. When you question them, verify their response. The aftermath. So the most important thing I think that came about this, the best thing, was Sarbanes-Oxley. And this act's main goal was to regulate financial reporting, internal audits, and other business practices. A Whistleblower Protection Act was put in place, and the PCOB was created. WorldCom went bankrupt following this scandal. However, in 2006, WorldCom's assets were bought by the popular Verizon. Thank you all for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed it.